Hello everyone, and thanks again for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Dave Percy. I'll be hosting today's show. Up first here on the hazardous weather chart, we've got wind advisories and early this evening that were up today for the eastern interior here. Eagle seeing gusts 30-40 miles an hour out of the east-northeast. And then one will kick in here for the eastern Alaska range later tonight and actually for tomorrow, as some winds pick up there and begin to gust over 40 miles an hour. There's a winter storm warning out until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning for the Yukon Delta area for snow and blowing snow, reducing visibilities to possibly down to half or even a quarter mile. In some cases, possible whiteout conditions there overnight tonight. And then the yellow shaded areas here are for a winter weather advisory, Yukon Delta area, on up into the lower Yukon Valley, Kuskokwim Delta up to the lower Yukon Valley, and on out toward the coast. Pretty strong winds this afternoon along the coast there from Cape Newinam to Nunivak Island and in over Bristol Bay. But anyway, the winter weather advisory out until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning for possibly visibilities reduced to a half mile or less and blowing snow. Also out there, St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast, same thing with winter weather advisory for reduced visibilities in snow and blowing snow. Moving on to the satellite imagery, you can see a frontal boundary here, one low pressure area moving into the Russian Far East, front coming down right across the St. Lawrence Island area, and then kind of a wave developing here, moving northwestward as the moisture extending back out to the southeast here, bringing rain today, rain and gusty winds Kodiak Island, and even much stronger winds over portions of western Bristol Bay. Alaska Peninsula winds gusting 35 to 45 miles an hour ahead of the front, beginning to taper off behind it. Another system back through here. But that wave developing on the frontal boundary right through here, as you can see that little kink in the cloud band there, moving up toward St. Paul, that put the squeeze in the atmosphere, and pretty strong wind gusts, 76 miles per hour reported this afternoon at Cape Newingham and Kaliganik there in Bristol Bay. They had gusts to about 70 miles an hour during the mid-afternoon hours today, and again 40 to 50 mile an hour winds crossing the Alaska Peninsula from the east-southeast. Otherwise, some wind and rain, Kodiak Island, and then areas of snow back across the northwest. Some of those areas mixing with rain, and could be some areas of freezing rain or sleet, so kind of a zone there of wintry, more kind of a wintry mix going on there. But anyway, warmer air definitely surging northward, and this weaker system here spreading some rain, mostly from areas west of Unalaska on out to about Atka, possibly Adak, and then a pretty good breakout there over the far western Aleutians and Bering Sea. Otherwise, over the southeast coast, clear skies, not a lot going on, pretty quiet there, light winds, dry conditions up into throughout much of the eastern interior, although we pick up the winds here over the, again around the Eagle area and portions of the 40-mile country, but generally dry, or it was dry today, North Gulf Coast, northward there. And then this mass of clouds dropping southeastward, just clipping the eastern Arctic coast there with snow and fog, reducing the visibilities down to half mile or less at times in some areas there, mainly on the far eastern coast. Better conditions back to the west. On the chart for today, you can see the tightening gradient here coming in toward Kodiak Island. Storm warnings out through these areas ahead of the front, again with those winds gusting over 70 miles an hour out along portions of the coastline here, and those will be out till the system lifts northward later this evening and overnight tonight. And the blowing snow with a winter storm warning out for the Yukon Delta, and kind of a mixture of precipitation there as temperatures warm up. A narrow band of mixed rain and snow, possibly areas of light freezing rain here, and then into the rain down toward Cape Newinam, on back toward the Alaska Peninsula, changing to showers, lighter winds for the western Alaska Peninsula, and then back into rain, but not so much wind here for the Aleutians area. This system just to the south, a break, and then farther out to the west, some scattered snow showers of that trough out toward the Komodorsky Islands. And again, this front bringing snow and maybe blowing and drifting around St. Lawrence Island there for the winter weather advisory that'll remain out through tonight, with that front mostly pulling back to the northwest, kind of slowly moving northward. So we'll see where it goes for tonight. That does finally lift right to near the island tonight. So snow will continue. Look for possibly the winds tapering off toward morning tomorrow, but increasing chances of snow for the southern coast of the Seward Peninsula to the Bering Strait. Just some clouds possibly making it into the Kotzebue Sound area, Noatak Valley, or probably not even making it to the Noatak Valley. Staying clear and dry here, and over the interior could see some increase in the mid and high level clouds northward again all the way to the Arctic coast, but the lower stuff will stay back to the west. This front beginning to break up and weaken quite a bit here over the southwest interior due to the terrain, and so just some areas of rain and snow mixed sleet, or just possibly some isolated areas of freezing rain. And then back into the rain here, Kodiak Island, that front very slow to move. Moisture spreading northward, rain along the coastline here, the Kenai Peninsula, mixture, whatever gets to the northwest here. Very little chance of anything making it west into Cook Inlet or west of the Chugach Mountains. Be hard pressed to see an increase in the clouds with the Susitna Valley tonight. Otherwise, areas here to the east and to the north will be dry with winds again diminishing here over the eastern interior, and starting to get a little breezy there for the western central Arctic coast, maybe even over to the east side, but everything under advisory level. Southeast coast, light winds, mostly clear skies and fair conditions. Then for tomorrow, we'll see chance of precipitation tries to reach the outer coastline during the afternoon there. High pressure basically holding, especially aloft here over western Canada, on up into the Mackenzie River Delta area. But the whole pattern slowly trying to shift to the east. That's going to allow this moisture to come slowly northward. Front dissipating or hanging together enough to keep the precipitation chances going here over the southwest interior areas, with gusty winds now continuing along the coast. Another trough rotating in, so the winds will come down late tonight, early tomorrow, and then pick back up again, but probably not to the levels you saw today out along the coast or in toward Bristol Bay. Definitely lighter winds for Bristol Bay. Showers for Kodiak Island with a lot less wind, and southwest breezes, kind of gusty, but mostly in that 15 to 35 mile per hour range from the Alaska Peninsula on up toward the Pribilofs. Windy, blowing snow for the St. Lawrence Island area, and then just clouds on the north side of the Seward Peninsula all the way up to possibly Point Lay, and again kind of breezy there in the central and western Arctic coast, with not much change here over the eastern interior. Could be some early morning lower stuff in the valleys. Otherwise, don't look for a whole lot of change. Some of this moisture will definitely slide up into western Prince William Sound during the afternoon tomorrow. And the outlook for the second day of the weekend, Sunday, this front does a slow dissolve along the coast here. Still a chance of some showers or light rain along the north coast from roughly Sitka on up to Alphen Cove. Little, if anything, probably nothing at all over the inland areas, inside waters, and partly variably cloudy. That front really weakening right off the coast, hanging together enough to keep a chance of rain or snow up along the Prince William Sound area, North Gulf Coast. Dry for Cook Inlet. Start picking up the moisture here as you get over toward the Alaska Range. And again, another big push of moisture from the south here. This next system driving northward. So wind and rain, warmer temperatures surge northward once again. Chance of snow here over the western interior, back to the western Arctic coast. Snow showers out along the west coast, and a trough will bring snow showers into the Pribilofs, and the Aleutians, high pressure building in out to the west. Low temperatures forecast for tonight again, anywhere from 25 to possibly 35 below zero, Copper River Basin on up into the Yukon Flats, and then 5 to 10 below for the eastern Arctic coast, to just a little under zero on the west side there, under mild southerly flow. Temperatures staying near 40 around Kodiak Island, and in the mid to upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and pretty mild freezing, near freezing here across the southwest interior areas, and right around 20 there for the Seward Peninsula, mid-20s for St. Lawrence Island, and the Panhandle anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20s along the coast. And for the highs tomorrow, mostly in the 30s here across all of the southeast coast, upper 20s there along the Klondike Highway to White Pass, lower 40s here, Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula for the highs, mid-20s to lower 30s, south central Alaska, single numbers here north of the Alaska Range, to still a shade below zero for the Yukon Flats and down toward Northway. Right around zero, eastern Arctic coast, much milder here to the west, with temperatures pushing up to or into the lower 30s for the Seward Peninsula, especially from Nome back down to St. Lawrence Island, upper 30s for the Pribilofs. And for the lows Sunday morning, Still below zero here over the eastern interior, but not as far below. Looks like mostly in the 20s for the Panhandle. Again, above freezing for the Alaska Peninsula, portions of Bristol Bay. Afternoon highs almost getting above zero for the Yukon Flats, but not quite making it, and mild here in the southwest.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First significant weather graphic shows IFR here spreading northward later tonight into Saturday morning. Kodiak Island improving to marginal VFR, say toward AKwx. Back to the west there, Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, but from about Adak on out, looking pretty good VFR-wise. IFR, Pribilof Islands right into the southwest coast and inland to the Kilbrook Mountains, and more IFR up here over the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, on up to the Bering Strait and the Bering Sea coast. Good VFR, North Slope, Arctic coast, through the central eastern interior. Susitna Valley, Matanuska Valley should stay VFR through tomorrow, as well as the Copper River Basin, and of course all of the Panhandle. For tomorrow afternoon, again, VFR here in the east, southeast coast, all the way up through the interior to the central and eastern Arctic coast. This area moisture under southwest flow pushing eastward and northward, marginal now all the way into the into the Arctic Ocean there from about Point Lay westward. Patchy areas of IFR working inland, especially here along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, south coast of the Kenai Peninsula, and marginal VFR getting into western Prince William Sound in the afternoon. IFR, again, Kodiak Island, southern Kodiak Island, Sitkinak on back across the Alaska Peninsula. And then for Sunday morning, this area lifting northward and just a narrow band of lower flying conditions here, Prince William Sound to about Cape Yakataga, on down to some marginal VFR into the southern southeast coast, VFR to the north, staying nice eastern interior all the way up to the central coast, and quite an area of marginal VFR, some spotty areas of IFR here along the west coast. Then by afternoon, the next big surge of moisture comes rolling on up. You can see IFR rapidly hits the south coast of the Alaska Peninsula, spreads up to Kodiak Island and the Aleutian Range. Marginal VFR on the increase here into southwest Alaska along the Alaska Range there. IFR up there over the northern Bering Sea, and also from Noatak Valley, Kivalina up to, say, Point Hope, Cape Lisburne. And for passes tomorrow and the Tuvakanadigan, both VFR once again. And then for the Lake Clark and Merrill, change coming up tonight. Marginal VFR with the possibility of IFR tomorrow afternoon here on both eastern entrances. Farther north there at Rainy, I think it'll just be kind of a VFR to marginal VFR in the later part of the afternoon, going marginal, lowest on the eastern entrance. And for windy, ceilings visibilities will be, or ceilings will be lowering, clouds will be thickening and lowering, but they should stay in the VFR zone through tomorrow afternoon. And Isabel VFR, Mentasta same forecast VFR, and Tanita VFR, with Portage VFR becoming marginal late in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White, good VFR. Freezing levels, high pressure aloft here right over the interior, slowly moving eastward. So we've got the 6,000 foot freezing level right over the central interior here, 2,000 to 4,000 feet up to the western Arctic coast, and 6,000 feet over the southern Panhandle. A little cooler here across southern Alaska at the surface, also across the southern part of the state into the Bering. And taking a look at the icing graphic, again, moisture, southeast flow here carrying considerable moderate rime icing, likely showing up along the south coast of the Kenai Peninsula during the day tomorrow and into the afternoon, probably spreading over to the western Alaska Range tomorrow night. Otherwise, just some spotty areas of light to very isolated moderate rime icing here. Togiak Bay, Dillingham, in toward the Kuskokwim Mountains, and back through the Bering Strait. Another zone here, the Alaska Peninsula, up toward the Pribilof, St. Paul, St. George, and then back down in toward Atka. And then for the winds aloft, here's that strong ridge right over the eastern interior, slowly pushing eastward a little bit there, but this northerly flow kind of holding it back. This low coming northward, south to north flow, bringing the moisture and warmer air into the west central interior. This one sneaking off to the east will drop off to the southeast and miss the Panhandle. For the winds aloft 9,000 feet, southeast flow here, 30 to 40 knots, lightest over the interior with the ridge axis through that area, turning west-northwest at 15 to 25 there, back over the western Aleutians, light winds across the Panhandle, and at 3,000 feet, same pattern here, south to southeast, 30 to 40 knots. over the southwest interior. 50 knots staying south of the Alaska Peninsula. Lighter winds over the eastern interior down across the southeast coast. Turbulence-wise, moderate chop pretty likely here, considerable spreading northward throughout the day, all the way up to the far western Arctic coast, south through the western interior, Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, and spreading into the southern Kenai Peninsula.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
So we're averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5, 10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there, or we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of their passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of the primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so that'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis with the storms heading south to north here and the southerly winds on average here across the Bering Sea, eastern Bering, not very conducive for any further ice expansion. In fact, when those lows lift northward, you go into the southwest winds, that'll tend to pack it back in to the northeast and to the north, and looks like that'll continue for at least through the weekend. Moving on to coastal water forecasts here for the southeast coast. That front edging in toward the coastline won't be much of a wind producer here. Southeast coming up to 20 knots, 6 to 8 foot seas on the outer coast. Pretty light and variable winds over the inside waters, 10 to 15 knots from the southeast for Clarence Strait to northwest Inland Canal. And then for Sunday, with that boundary stays off the coast and pretty much just dissolves out there. So kind of a light variable wind pattern develops here along the outer coastline now, although small craft advisory is still in effect due to the 8 foot seas in the forecast, with just 5 knot winds here on the north coast, otherwise 10 to 15 from the northwest down south. North to northwest 10 to 15, central southern inside waters, northern Canal north at 20. Prince William Sound northeast 15, but brisker wind here for the North Gulf Coast. East at 30 knots. Minimum gales out of the east here pick up to 40 knots across the Barrens. Northeast 40 for Kachemak Bay. Southern Cook Inlet north 35 knots, 10 foot seas. North of the Forelands northeast at 25. And then for Sunday, those fall back to just 10 knots here for the northern inlet and down to 15 knots south of the Forelands, seas subsiding to 3 feet. Southeast 20 now for Kachemak Bay, south 20 the Barrens, and south to southeast winds only 15 knots for the North Gulf Coast and variable to north at 10 with 2 foot seas, Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, southeast 20 on the east side, Chillicothe Strait east at 30, and then south 25, Castle Cape to Sitkinak, or Castle Cape to Cape Sarachev, southeast 30, 21 foot seas there in that zone, and then small craft advisories for Bristol Bay and the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Those come down to about 20 knots here from the southeast, Bristol Bay, all the way down on the north side of the peninsula. South side, southeast to south, 30 knots all the way up to Sitkinak, and 20 to 30 knot southerlies in the forecast for Kodiak Island, with the seas up to 13 feet there on the eastern zone. And then for the Fox Islands tomorrow, southwesterlies 20 to 30 knots, seas and winds strongest on the south Pacific side of the islands. West-northwest at about 25, become northwest 25 to 30 here for Adak and Atka, seas 10 to 14 feet, and then things drop off considerably as you head west down to just 15 knots. Then, excuse me, 35 knot force gales come back in to the far western Aleutians on Sunday, kind of a light wind pattern here, Kiska to Adak, and then northwest 20 to 25 for Atka, 25 to 30 as you get over toward the Nikolsky area. and then northeast 30 south of Unalaska Island, west 20 north of Unalaska Island. And then for the southwest coast tomorrow, southeast 20 to 25 knots, strongest south of Nunivak Island, easterlies at 25 for St. Lawrence Island, and southeast 15 for the Pribilofs, and northeast 20 for St. Matthew Island. Then for the next day on Sunday, southeasterlies 25 knots, brisk wind advisories continue St. Lawrence Island, south 25 knots here south of Nunivak Island, otherwise west to southwest at 20 for St. Matthew and St. Paul Island, and up to the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, brisk wind advisories, easterlies extend along the entire coastline here all the way down to Cape Beaufort. East winds 25 to 30 knots. That 30 knot plus area will be from about Point Lay on down to Cape Lisburne, and then southeast 20 to 25 across the Chukchi Sea. And then for Sunday, easterlies come down to 20 knots here for the eastern coast, and southeast 20 for the central and west side. And then from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, 25 knots southeasterlies, Cape Thompson to the Bering Strait, southeast at 30. For tonight, again, breezy mostly on the west side, but those winds will pick up on the east side as well. Otherwise dry and mostly clear, temperature 25 to 35 below here over the eastern interior. Again, much milder with a southeast wind and precipitation clouds rolling northward. Winter weather advisory tonight or a winter storm warning tonight for the Yukon Delta. Winter weather advisories for the Kuskokwim Delta at St. Lawrence Island. Snow and blowing snow, rain, wind, Kodiak Island, trying to edge up toward the Kenai Peninsula, and then that whole front edges over toward the Panhandle tomorrow, and northward here coming in, but weakening over the southwest interior. Another trough brings another shot into the southwest coast from the Pribilofs tomorrow afternoon, and then a front brings a chance of precipitation over much of western interior Alaska on Sunday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.